Chiropractors, are you prepared for chiropractic business? Welcome, everybody, to the KC ChiroPulse podcast brought to you by CATS Consultants, helping doctors keep their pulse on success. I'm Dr. Michael Perusich, your host. I'm joined by my guest host, Marisa Mateja, the wonderful CA trainer, knowledge of everything, runs the company, etc. All right, Marisa.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it's true. So seriously, we want to talk about what it takes to run a business in the chiropractic world today, because I think the game rules, the rules of the game have completely changed, not just recently, but probably over the last 20 years or so. So we can't run and manage our practices the way we used to, or the way we always have, number one. And number two, in school, we really get this, while it's great, we get this great overview of how to run a practice, but you don't really get to run a practice. And there's a big difference. I mean, you don't get an MBA in business.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, you're not in entrepreneur school. You're not in a true business school getting that MBA. You're there to learn how to be the doctor. But the reality is when you get out of school, you now have a multitude of hats that you're wearing, right? So you're now the doctor, but you're also an entrepreneur. And I'm sure we could think of several other hats, a marketer or, whatever. You're a lot of different things.
You're a marketer, you're a communicator, you're a leader, you're a speaker, you're confidant. We wear so many hats. It's crazy. And if you're not just really on your toes and on your game with your business skills, a lot of these things just start squirting away from you, and you don't even realize it. And if you're not paying attention, it really begins to affect the profitability and the true value of your practice.
Sure. And so if we look at what you get in school, you're right. It's a great overview, but the things that are missing are those little details. It's what does a doctor owner really expect of you if you're going to go into an associateship? Like what are the true things that they're going to want from you? Those are things that may not be shared with you, not on purpose or anything, but those are just things that a teacher in school probably isn't going to be able to share if they're not in practice themselves.
Right. And honestly, in a couple of quarters or a trimester or something in school, all there's time for is just an overview. It's just a business class. So you have the exposure. You have just enough exposure. You have just enough exposure to be dangerous, really, in some respects, and dangerous to yourself more than anything. And you brought up a great point. We think, okay, I'm just going to go out and be an associate and, work in somebody else's practice for a while. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean to the owner of the practice? Are you just there to fill up space, or do they really want you to be profitable? And we see a lot of associateships break down because there's not that understanding of how to make a true associateship work, for example, because both the owner of the clinic and the associate have different goals. And if you don't somehow mesh those together, then your paths will go in opposite directions. And that's just one little component of the business side of practice. And there's so many.
Does your niche fall in suit with an associateship, or should you just be an owner? Do you have a different vision for what you're really wanting to do with your degree, with your path down the chiropractic steps there? Like what do you want to do with it? So it comes down to, what does it mean to be an owner then? So moving away from the associateship, what does it mean to be an owner of a practice? There's so many things you can break down there of
it's huge.
What do you need to know?
Well, I mean, you need to know what kind of business entity you need to be. So you need to have the right professionals behind you, an attorney, an accountant. Are you just slapping something together and opening your doors, or are you a legal business? And there's different types of clinics these days. And you can be a solo practitioner, you can be a group, you can be integrated, you can be a staffless practice, you can be a high niche. I'm going to say niche. You can be a high niche practice. I looked it up. You can say it either way.
Yeah.
You can be high niche, like a neurology based practice or a pediatric practice. You can be a PI practice. You can be a cash practice. You can be a concierge practice. You can be, the list goes on and on.
And you know what
And
I'm going to say? I don't know that we've seen one alike either within those
no,
different types. Everybody
and
has
that's kind
their
of the
own,
beauty of chiropractic, really.
yeah, everybody has their own vision of the services you want to provide and those kind of things. And the true knowledge comes with, now how do you take that and run the business side as well? You have to be
Right.
profitable. You have to, make sure that the business side functions at a very high level as well, so that you can mesh all of those ideas together.
Yeah, and over time, you've got to really understand where your practice is going. So most of us start out in just kind of a general, we need every patient coming in the door that we can get.
Sure.
And so, we're taking everything from the 2-month-old baby to, the 85-year-old grandmother and everything in between, just so we've got patients coming in, which is, you get that. But after a while, after a year or two, you start developing kind of your interest.
Yeah.
And if your interest becomes pediatric, for example, and that's the direction you want your practice to go, but you're still marketing to families and geriatric patients and those kind of things, are you putting the right message out? So you really have to be paying attention. What's your target market? What's your niche? Is your messaging correct? There's just so many things like that to think about.
Well, and not only that, let's say you're ready to find a location. Do you know how to negotiate a lease? Do you know what to look for on those leases to make sure you get the best deals, if you will? I mean, there's so many different things that the business side of it is just important to know. Important to know.
Absolutely, because you can really get caught in a trap on a lease if you're not careful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
you
So
know and a great example is a landlord typically is going to want to get as long of a term of a lease out of you as they possibly can, and there's little ways that they can inject that into the lease without you even realizing it. There's other things too, like what expenses are you going to have to pay when you're
yeah,
leasing space? A lot of people don't realize that when they go into a lease, most of the time today's leases are written so that the HVAC system is your responsibility, not the landlord's, if it goes out, because you're the user of it. And that's, if your AC system goes out, I just replace mine. I know what it costs. It
yeah,
costs a lot. So, there's little things like that that you've got to understand, because that understanding leads to how you plan. And if
yeah,
you don't plan, then you're planning for failure. So you've got to make sure that you build that all together. So, and that kind of goes back to having a good business plan, for
yeah.
example.
You
You've
have
got
to
to have
have
a
that.
good business plan, and somebody that's a mentor, an advisor, or something that's helping you put that business plan together, so you don't miss too many details. You'll never get them all. You'll
Yeah.
never get them all. But somebody that's had the experience helping you put that together can really help you fine tune it to where you're going to understand what your expenditures should look like.
Yeah.
You're going to understand what your cash flows should look like, how you're going to use your funding and your lines of credit and those kind of things.
Well, and I was just getting ready to say that also leads into that funding side of it. And if you've got a good plan in place, it makes sense to have that done so that you can go to those banks or wherever to get those loans or whatever to open up a practice. Most of us are not going to have the funds available, especially after chiropractic school costs, to be able
Right.
to, do that without that. So you've got to have a good plan in place to make sure that those funds are available to you.
Absolutely. We're talking a lot about going into practice, whether it's an associateship or starting your own practice, just kind of how to launch from school to, I'm going to say, from school to success. And so,
Yeah.
doctors, if you're listening to us and you're already in practice, don't turn this off. This is still about you, because we're going to start talking about some other things with business that you need to know to fine tune your practice so that you're maximizing profit. But first, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsor. We'll be right back. Here's a quick message from our sponsor, Katz Chiropractic Business Advisors. We'll be right back.
Is your team dropping the ball?
Do you have your go-to person who always has the ball?
Is your
All right,
team
everybody,
trained
welcome
and
back to
ready
the
for what
KC
daily
CHIROPulse
practice
podcast. We're
throws at
talking
them?
about, Marissa and I are talking
Can you
about
depend on your
going
team
into
to catch the
practice
training
and the
on their
business
own?
skills that you need to
Let
make
us help
practice
you hit it
work
out of the
for
park.
you, not
We
against you,
want to be your
to reach
coach.
your maximum profitability and success as quickly as possible and to sustain it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things to go into. Yeah, exactly. So we've talked about associateships. We've talked about business plans. We've talked about financing and funding. We've talked about a whole lot of different things. One of the things that I think gets missed, especially early on in practice, is understanding how to analyze the practice. Once it's up and going, how do we analyze it? And I think everybody knows this. I'm big, big, big on statistics. And, for a lot of our members, we do these big 36 plus point statistical analyses every month on our practices. Because what do stats tell you? What's that analysis tell you? It truly tells you the real health of your practice. Your practice
really does.
Success isn't how much is in the checking account.
Yeah.
That tells you where you've been. We want to look to the future and see where it's going.
That's the big key right there is what are we trending? What are we trending to do in practice? I help staff even look at some of these numbers and be able to fine tune not only what they're seeing on the numbers, but how do we improve upon that? Meaning our scheduling, our communication, all of these things fall into those numbers. And you and I can pull a lot of that out and say, hey, I can see where there may be some ups and downs in your practice, and we need to look at the communication at this point of the treatment plans. We need to look at different things that are going on. And so it's amazing what we can pull out of that information. Not only that, but are we scheduling appropriately? I mean, there's so many different things that the numbers tell us, that we want to be able to dive into. So numbers are a huge part of everything.
They're huge. I mean, one little simple thing is we can watch your expenses, and if they're trending up, then we start looking at the P&L and figuring out, that means profit and loss. That means we're going in and looking, where do we need to cut overhead? What's going up? Or is it a pricing strategy issue? And it's not really our expenses so much are going up, but our collections aren't going in the direction they should be. So we look at these inverse models when we look at statistical analysis that tells us a whole bunch of things. Now, the one thing it doesn't tell us is how good your compliance is. And that's another big avenue that you really have to manage in practice. That's a whole nother hat, is being, compliance department.
Truly is.
Yeah. So, because there's so many things you have to manage when it comes to the practice. You have to manage HIPAA. You have to manage your Cures Act. You have to manage your employees. You have to manage, all these different things. Yeah. No Surprises Act. Thank you. You got to manage all these different things in your practice, and not just when you have a problem, not just sweep it under the rug and not pay attention to it.
Right.
But document it correctly and put plans in place to correct it and find out what is the corrective way to attack that and so forth. And then you have to constantly monitor it. And this is a big place that we see doctors kind of fall down a little bit. And I don't mean that negative. It's a lot to manage. I get that. And that's one of the things that we really try to help our clients with. But it's easy for some of those things to fall through the cracks. Like, have you done your HIPAA training this year?
Right. And documented it.
Several of you just passed out.
And documented. And are you using your compliance manual? We call it the Book of Defense. Are you using that compliance manual to really help you defend against some of the things that may come if you were to be audited or anything like that?
Right. And then that all just comes full circle around to, should I get on insurance plans?
Yeah, I was just going to say the insurance world, right? So yeah, and that's a big discussion for students or new docs starting out. That's a huge area of concern, is knowing how to get on insurance plans and what to do and which ones to pick and which ones to avoid, and how to, for those of you who are in practice, evaluate that if you're still accepting insurance and you have plans that you're still on. Are they profitable plans? Do you even know, are you making money when you're seeing that patient? We have to balance that. Is it good for the patient, but also is it good on our business plan moving forward.
Yep, that's our litmus test for everything. And far too often we see doctors, they become a provider on an insurance plan and they'll just go down with the ship, so to speak, with it. As reimbursement goes down, they're not really paying attention sometimes. I mean, they're paying attention enough to know it's going down, but
Right.
just because it's going down and it's lowering your profitability doesn't mean you have to stay on that plan. So every year
That's
you
the
really have,
key.
that's
You
the
have
key. Every
to
year you
pay
have to
attention.
analyze. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to analyze that insurance reimbursement every year and see all those plans still make sense. Some of them may not. And then if they don't make sense, how many patients do we have on it? What do we do to move in a different direction without losing patients? And there are some great ways to put some processes, some systems in place so that you don't lose patients and you survive the loss of reimbursement.
Yeah. There's another area that I see coming out of school that, and I'm going to go back to the COVID era, may not have done some of these students a great service here, is really the marketing aspect of what you're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
marketing's huge for what you're doing, and just opening your doors and staying within those doors probably isn't going to get you very far. So when I say that, I mean, you've got to be ingrained into that community that you're in, and they have to know who you are. So you've got to find
Yep.
ways to be in front of people, finding people, where are they? How do they connect to you? How do they connect to your business? Those kind of things. So marketing is also a huge aspect of that business side of practice.
I we could probably take a lesson from the mailman here. So my mailman, he's just this awesome guy. He drives around in his Jeep in the neighborhood delivering mail with his stereo up, and it's like the ice cream truck. You hear him coming from several houses away. And he kind of does that on purpose because it draws people out of their houses, because he's just a fun guy to talk to. And
Yeah.
if he sees you out in the yard or the driveway or something, he'll get out of his Jeep and bring your mail to you and stand there and talk to you. How's your day? How's your life? And he just gives
Service
that,
with a smile.
yeah, he just gives that level of service that is unique and you want to engage with him.
Mm-hmm.
And we as doctors need to get out in our communities and be the mailman, so to speak. We
Love
need
that.
to, get out there and become a fixture in the community that everybody knows, everybody enjoys hanging around. They see you at lunch and they're waving to you, or they want to come over and talk to you. You don't do that with marketing. You do that by getting out and getting involved, serving on boards, being little league coaches, whatever. You just got to put the time in to do those things, but it pays off in a big, big way.
Yeah, it really does. It also allows you to start creating your internal culture. So
Right.
your internal culture is who you want to attract to your practice, not only on the patient side, and we haven't talked about this, but when you get to that point where you need employees, and that's the human resource side. So you've got lots of rules under that, right? So knowing how to create that culture that you want moving forward is also super important for the practice and the business side of what you're doing, because you have to attract employees that match your culture and who are willing
Yep.
to push your culture further down the road for business, and it helped attract patients essentially, and things to the practice.
Yeah, they have to be engaged in your vision and they have to
Yeah.
buy into it.
Yeah.
Otherwise they're going to be working against you, and that's typically the staff that leaves after a few months, or sometimes even a few weeks.
Yeah.
And you don't want that kind of turnover. It's just too much to deal with, honestly. One of the things too, if we're talking about staff, which we were, but when we're talking about staff, we have to make sure that we're spending the time for training and development as well.
Yes. Yes.
So we can't just give them the playbook, so to speak, and say, here's a bunch of procedures. I want you to read them, and I hope you have them down by the time you show back up tomorrow. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to make sure that we're not just making them or trying to get them to do self-teaching.
Right.
We want to really get in there and do a lot of training and development. And it's one of the things that employees want today. It's one of the reasons why they stay on a job, if there's good training and development.
Absolutely. Our football team, our favorite one, wouldn't have made it to the Super Bowl several times if they weren't practicing. And that's the huge part that we want to make sure that staff is getting. They need that practice to make sure that they're doing things correctly and in the benefit of the patient, and the practice to make sure that we stay above board, we do all those things, and that they're happy with what they're doing, and that they want to stay and retain in your practice just like we want your patients to. It's important to keep those employees too.
Yep, absolutely. So training is incredibly important. And, another important aspect of practice too is the art of scheduling.
Oh, yes. My favorite.
It's your favorite thing. It truly is. So Marisa truly is this Van Gogh of the scheduling world. She can make a schedule work like nobody can. But scheduling is incredibly important, and managing that schedule is incredibly important.
And even lining it out from the beginning correctly.
The way it's laid out.
It's how it's laid out. It's how it's orchestrated, if you will. It's
right.
How is it going to function together? It's kind of like if you think of an orchestra and you start putting all those different instruments together, and how do they come together to make one song? It's the same thing on your schedule. You have to be able to put together not only a doctor, but potentially a therapist, and you have to put together what rooms and what services, and all these things kind of come together to create a nice cohesive schedule that runs efficiently. And so it's incredibly important to your practice to have a good schedule. Huge.
There are so many things. I mean, we could make this a 24-hour podcast.
One of the reasons we wanted to talk about this subject is we collaborated recently with the American Chiropractic Association to offer some classes for students on some of these topics, because they are concerned about some of these things as well that students need to know. So, they've got some, if you're an ACA student member, go look, they've got some of our classes for free available. And then on October, hold on, I'm going to tell you, on October 5th, we're actually doing a live Q&A with them through the ACA. So check it out. Ask us questions. Feel free. That's what it's for. We're excited to share our knowledge with you and have some fun with that. So, and part of these classes come out of a program that we have for new docs students. You can sign up as a student even and get started on some of this, called the Path to Launch. So very inexpensive. Go check us out and see what we've got available. But everything we talked about today is probably within that program, I would say. So we have a lot of detail on the business. And of course, those are all your basics.
Yeah. And then for doctors who are in practice, we have programs that just take it to the whole next level. So if you haven't done so yet, go to katzconsultants.com. Check us out. It's Katz with a K, K-A-T-S. Go check us out on the internet and check out our website. See all the different things that we do. You can see our events. There's lots of downloads on there. Our blogs are on there. There's lots of free stuff. So go check us out. See what we do. See how we're disrupting how doctors manage their practices and develop huge profitability in their practices as well. So go check us out. And I think, thank you everybody for tuning in to the KC ChiroPulse podcast. Again, brought to you by Katz Consultants. We're always here to help you, keeping doctors on the track to success. So we'll see you next time.
Yeah.